Mud clung to the street like old sorrow. The town had gathered, half curious, half cruel. "Get out of here." Sledge's shout cut through the drizzle. He was the saloon owner, the landlord, and for Martha Dane, the last door between shelter and the open road. He hurled her last iron pan into the street. It hit the mud, echoing like a slap across her face, and dirty water splashed over her worn shoes. The town doesn't need a diner that smells like grease. Laughter rolled through the crowd. Martha bent down to rescue the small wooden sign that carried her name, Martha's Diner, but his boot came down first. The crack of breaking wood sounded louder than any gunshot she had ever heard. "And I don't need a fat widow who can't pay rent on time." She tried to speak, just 3 days late. "Sledge, the crops, I don't care." He barked and shoved her hard. Her body hit the mud with a dull thud. Cold water soaked through her apron, through every memory of the kitchen she loved. The crowd laughed again, sharp, nervous laughter that smelled of beer and gossip. Children pointed. Women turned away, pretending not to see. For a moment she stayed there, hands trembling, gripping the broken sign. The rain came heavier now, washing over her hair, her cheeks, her pride. A single word stared back at her from the shattered wood. "Welcome." Across the street, a man had stopped walking. A black coat, clean shoes, eyes that didn't flinch. Ethan Rowe, the banker from the city, the man whose decision would decide whether this town lived or died. He didn't laugh. He didn't move. He simply watched her. Sledge noticed him at once. His tone changed like a snake shedding skin. "Mr. Rowe, welcome, sir. Don't mind this mess. I'm just cleaning up." Martha looked up from the mud. Water ran down her face, but her eyes were steady. And there, reflected in the puddle between them, stood his polished boots, still, silent, and far too clean for a place like this. That night, the rain didn't stop. Martha sat alone inside what was left of her diner. The stove had gone cold, the chairs stacked like tired soldiers. A single lamp burned beside the counter, throwing a trembling circle of light across the empty room. Her hands shook as she scrubbed the same table for the 10th time. Mud still clung to her apron, dried into brown stains she could not wash away. Every clang from the street made her flinch, expecting Sledge's voice again. But only the rain answered. Then the door opened. Cold air rushed in, carrying the smell of wet earth and moneyed perfume. Ethan Rowe stepped inside. His black coat dripped with rain. For a moment, neither spoke. He looked around the dim diner, the cracked sign leaning against the wall, the empty shelves, the woman behind the counter clutching a rag as if it were armor. "I saw what happened," he said quietly. "Do you have anything warm left?" Martha hesitated. Her instinct said no, send him away before pity burned deeper. But habit won. She turned to the stove, struck a match, and set the pot back on the fire. The scent of beef and onions filled the air again, faint at first, then rich and full. She ladled the stew into a chipped bowl, slid it toward him without a word. Ethan sat. He tasted once, and stopped. Steam rose between them. He took another spoonful, slower this time. "How long have you been cooking like this?" "Since I could reach the pot," she answered. He nodded, studying the bowl as if it held an answer he'd been chasing for years. "This isn't just food," he said. "It tastes like something people forgot." Martha lowered her eyes. "It's only stew, Mr. Rowe. Maybe, but it reminded me of home." Outside, the rain softened. Inside, for the first time that day, silence felt kind. When he left, he placed $2 silver on the counter, more than the meal was worth, and a single line written on the napkin beneath them. "I'll be back tomorrow." Martha stared at the words until the lamp flickered out. For the first time in months, she believed someone might mean them. The rain ended the next morning, but the air still smelled of it. At noon, the bell above Martha's door rang once. Ethan Rowe stood there again, coat folded over his arm this time, hat in his hand. "I said I'd be back," he told her. She only nodded and went to the stove. He sat at the same table as before, the one nearest the window. Outside, wagons creaked through the mud, and sunlight caught on the puddles that hadn't yet dried. Inside, the diner breathed quietly, as if afraid the silence might break. Martha served him the stew, then stepped back to wipe the counter. He ate in peace. When he finished, he placed the coins neatly beside the bowl and left without another word. The next day, he came again. And the day after that, always at noon. After a week, she stopped pretending to be surprised. By the second week, she began setting out a clean bowl before he arrived. Sometimes he brought a ledger from the bank, spreading papers on the table while she worked behind the counter. Sometimes he simply watched the steam rise and said nothing. They spoke little, but the rhythm grew between them like the ticking of a clock. He noticed how she counted change twice before giving it back, how she tied her apron tighter when nervous. She noticed how he always straightened the chairs when leaving, how he never let the door slam. One afternoon, he asked, "Why do you stay open when no one else comes?" Martha glanced at the empty seats. "Because I belong somewhere, Mr. Rowe. If I close the door, that ends." He looked down at his hands. "I understand more than you think." From then on, he started bringing news, little things. The freight company was hiring. The mill had reopened. Tiny pieces of life returning to the town. He didn't say it aloud, but she understood. He was helping quietly, the way he ate quietly. By the end of the month, people began to notice. The banker ate there. The smell from her kitchen reached the street again. A pair of field workers stopped in one evening, then came back the next. Laughter, faint and hesitant, touched the walls that had been silent too long. When Ethan left that night, he paused by the door. "You should paint the sign again," he said. "It's still broken," she answered. "I know," he replied. "But people need to see the name." After he was gone, she stood in the doorway, watching the lamplight spill onto the muddy road. For the first time in weeks, she whispered the words on that sign aloud, "Martha's Diner," and smiled. Late spring storms rolled in without warning. That afternoon, the sky darkened before supper. Martha hurried to pull the shutters closed. The smell of rain crept through the cracks. Lightning flashed over the muddy street. She was reaching for the last window when the bell above the door rang. Ethan stepped in, soaked to the bone. "I thought you'd have gone home by now," he said. "This is home," she answered softly. Rain hammered the roof. Wind pushed the door open again. He caught it with both hands, leaning his weight until the latch clicked. Water ran from his hair onto the floorboards. Martha fetched a towel from the counter. "You'll ruin that coat," she said. He shook his head. "It's only a coat." She handed him the towel. Their fingers brushed, brief, but enough to still the sound of the storm for one heartbeat. Ethan looked at her apron, splattered with flour and grease and life. "You work too hard," he murmured. "And you think too much," she replied. For a while they just listened to the rain. Outside, thunder rolled west. Inside, the air smelled of coffee and wet wood. He took the towel she'd given him and, instead of drying himself, reached forward and dabbed a drop of rain from her cheek. It wasn't bold, it was simple, almost clumsy, but it made her forget how heavy the world had felt. She turned away, busying herself with the kettle. "Sit by the stove," she said, her voice steady again. He obeyed, pulling a chair close to the warmth. When the rain finally eased, he stood to leave. At the door, he paused. "I was going to offer to walk you home," he said. "But you'd only tell me you already are." She smiled faintly. "You learn fast, Mr. Rowe." He hesitated, then hung his towel on the peg by the door. "Keep it," he said. "For what?" "For the next storm." The bell rang behind him as he stepped into the quiet street. Martha stood there a long while, one hand on the towel, listening to the echo of his boots fade into the wet night. Summer crept in quietly. The road dried, the wheat fields turned gold. Martha's diner filled again, first with workers, then with families. The smell of bread and stew floated down Main Street every noon. People began to nod to her in passing. Even Sledge, from across the saloon porch, stopped shouting. Every day, Ethan Rowe came at the same hour, never missing a meal. Sometimes he brought ledgers, sometimes nothing at all. He'd sit by the window, hat resting on the chair beside him, and talk of things small and safe, prices of grain, the coming harvest, how the town might grow if the railroad came through. For Martha, each word built a world steadier than the one she'd known before. But good fortune has a way of drawing eyes. It began with whispers, too quiet to name. "She's got him wrapped around her apron strings," someone said outside the general store. "Maybe that stew's not the only thing she's serving." Laughter followed, thin and mean. By the week's end, the rumor had a life of its own. Men at the saloon spoke of how the banker was buying his meals with more than silver. Women crossed the street when Martha passed, pretending to look at window displays. And Sledge, seeing opportunity, poured fuel on the fire. "She feeds him after hours," he told anyone who'd listen. "Lights burn in that diner till midnight, and you tell me that's just cooking?" Martha heard it last. She always did. One morning, 2 farmhands who used to eat at her counter didn't show up. Then another day passed, then 2. By Friday, the bell above her door stayed silent. She worked anyway, scrubbing, cooking, pretending. When the stew cooled untouched, she poured it back into the pot, heart beating with something heavier than anger. That evening, Ethan came in as usual. He noticed the emptiness at once. "Where is everyone?" She kept her back to him. "Ask the town," she said quietly. He frowned. "Martha, what happened?" She turned then, eyes glistening. "They think you and I—" Her voice broke. He understood before she finished. Outside, thunder grumbled again, though the sky was clear. Ethan set his hat on the table. "Let them talk," he said. She shook her head. "You can afford rumors. I can't." When he reached for her hand, she stepped away. "Please," she whispered, "just go home." He hesitated, searching her face, but there was no anger there, only the weary knowledge of someone who had survived worse. Then he turned, leaving the bell above the door swinging in the silence behind him. 2 days passed. The diner stayed dark. The window sign hung crooked, its paint peeling under the heat. Inside, Martha sat at a cold stove, hands still as the pans she once polished. Each rumor echoed like a fly against glass. On the 3rd morning, the sound of wagons and boots rose outside. A crowd had gathered again, the same faces that once laughed when she fell. Sledge stood at their center, waving a paper. "Town petition," he announced. "She's to shut this place down. We won't have her poisoning our name." Martha opened the door before he could pound on it. Her eyes were tired but clear. "You want me gone, Sledge?" she said. "Then say it to my face." He grinned. "I don't need to. The town's already said it for me." A shadow moved behind him. The crowd parted as Ethan Rowe walked through the dust, Coat off, sleeves rolled, a white apron tied around his waist. The sight froze every whisper. He stepped past Sledge and into the diner. "Morning, Mrs. Dane," he said, as if nothing had changed. Then he picked up a ladle, dipped into the pot of stew she'd kept warming for no one, and served a bowl onto the counter. Turning to the crowd, he raised his voice. "This is what I've eaten every day for a month," he said. "And I'm still alive. In fact, I've never felt more human." Someone chuckled nervously. He kept going. "You want to judge a woman by gossip? Fine. But judge me too, because I chose her cooking over every fine table in this town." He set the bowl down and looked straight at Sledge. "She doesn't owe you rent. In fact, this building doesn't belong to you anymore. It belongs to the bank. To me." Gasps spread. Sledge's face reddened. Ethan continued, steady and measured. "And as the bank's owner, I declare this place open. Anyone who calls her a liar or a cheat can take it up with me or with the law." Silence. Only the spoon clinked against the bowl. Then a field hand stepped forward, took the bowl, and ate. Another man followed. Then a woman. Soon the diner was alive again, filled with the smell of hope and simmering broth. Martha stood behind the counter, hands to her mouth, watching the room she had lost come back to life. Ethan turned to her, smiling quietly. "Told you," he said. "People need to see the name." By evening, the crowd had gone, leaving only the scent of stew and wet dust. Martha moved through the diner like someone waking from a long sleep. The lamps glowed again. The chairs, once stacked, stood waiting. Ethan stayed behind to help clean. He scrubbed pans, wiped tables, his fine shirt rolled to the elbows. "You'll ruin those cuffs," she said. He smiled. "They've seen worse." For a while they worked in silence. Outside, the sky bled gold into violet, the kind of light that makes everything look forgiven. When the last dish was done, Martha poured 2 cups of coffee and slid one across the counter. "To the banker who cooks," she said. "To the woman who fed a town back to life," he answered. She laughed, quietly at first, then with the ease of someone who had forgotten she could. He took a sip, watching her. "You should hire help. The railroad crews will double your customers. I can't pay much yet." "I didn't say they'd expect money," he replied. "I'd like to invest, partner, if you'll have me." Martha hesitated. "And what would you want in return?" Ethan set down his cup. "Just a seat by the window, every noon. Maybe a slice of pie if there's any left." Her eyes softened. "You're an expensive man, Mr. Rowe." "Not anymore," he said. "This place has already cost me everything I used to believe mattered." Outside, the first train whistle sounded in the distance, a promise, not a warning. Martha looked toward the noise, then back at him. "Well," she said, "I'd better bake another pie." He chuckled, reached for his apron, and followed her into the kitchen. Behind them, the sign above the door caught the last light of the sun. Martha's Diner, still standing. In the end, Martha's Diner became more than a place to eat. It was where a woman's courage turned gossip into gratitude, and where a man finally learned that wealth means nothing if it cannot feed kindness. The town changed, but the sign above the door stayed the same, steady through every season, just like her. If you've ever been laughed at and kept standing anyway, this story was for you. Tell us where you're listening from, share it with someone who needs a little strength tonight, and don't forget to subscribe for the next Western tale of healing and hope.